welcome back to another edition. Mom, how are you?
I'm good, honey. How are you?
Good to see you. It's been too long, it feels like. Unfortunately, we don't do enough of these, and somehow we missed the turn of an entire new year between the last one. So, how was the new year for you?
Well, it's always busy. And, here, much like Chicago, I'm sure weather dependent. You might end up getting a big push of buyers if the weather's warm. Well, we've had warm till today. It's
Yeah,
freezing today.
yeah, I think we are all in the same position. We're at, like, well, when I woke up this morning, it said 0 true temperature. So, and that has definitely driven some behavior. In the past, cold hasn't completely shut buyers down. I do think this year it's a little bit of an exception because it's very cold. And there's not a lot to look at either, so it's been tough.
No, and everybody wants to buy because they're worried that interest rates are going to keep going up, thus the Fed decision this week. So they're trying to pick up what they can, and they feel panicked, at least in my area.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's the goal of today. So check in from last year. Let's see how it went. Just generally speaking, I know how Chicago did, and it was kind of the story of two halves of years. And then we'll look at what we think is happening moving forward. I know, at least from what I'm seeing with my buyers, it's been a challenging start to the year. So hopefully we can talk through some of those, some that I know that you're also looking for properties, so there's been some challenges there. So maybe we can get some value to everybody just by looking at what's been difficult and how we're overcoming that right now.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Awesome. So last year, and I'll just start with the Chicago side of things, was for us, it was a tale of, like I said, two halves. We had the first 6 months of the year, about 70% of the closed activity took place. So, I mean, our year was so front-loaded, and then in the last 6 months, it was crickets, and we really had nobody listed, nobody sold. We don't have a lot of buildings going on other than high-rises getting built. So it was interesting to see, like, the emergency brake pulled, and that was just interest rates. That's what drove that.
Yeah, we had exactly the same thing. Around March, we started to feel a little bit of a nibble of things, and that's when the Fed was opening his yap. And then by about May, things really shifted. People started to get a little like, I'm going to wait and see.
Right.
And as rates ticked up, buyer interest went down. And what did not trickle down was seller pricing. The sellers are still like, well, it's still crazy. And so we were advising our clients, we're not even going to do comparables older than 60 or 90 days by the end of last year.
I've also taken that approach. I think if you can find it, and sometimes it's hard, but if you can look within the last 3 months, that's your ideal comparison. And I think in some ways, particularly at the end of last year, going back 6 months was dangerous because you were hitting homes that maybe arguably sold over value, and they're not a good comparison. That's not something you should be confident with.
Right. And I don't think appraisers will either. Everybody's kind of stuck.
Yeah.
I just got an agreement on a property this week that was appraised in May of last year, and the buyer's agent said, well, that was May. And she's not wrong. Normally I'd go, it's only May, but she's correct.
It's interesting. I'm seeing, and I know we actually just talked about this, the multiple offer situation you saw the other day that was crazy in your market with 30 or 40 market offers or whatever it was.
Right.
But I think we're having that too, but not the same as it was during COVID. So during COVID, you could price, and I act like COVID's over. I guess I should say 2021 into the beginning of 2022, when the market was really prime for buyers, rates were low, everything was competitive. We had 20, 30, 40 offers on a property, but they were going well above fair market value, like exceedingly above, to the point where it didn't matter what an appraiser was going to say.
Right.
We're not really seeing that as much now. I'm seeing multiple offers, but it's not blowing the doors off of what I would consider fair market value to be. I'm seeing multiple offers on homes that are actually priced a little bit low, like they're below value.
I would say the same thing. And we're also seeing home inspections come back, appraisal contingencies coming back. So the market is normalizing a little. That's not to say there's still not multiple offers, but to your point where there might have been 20, now we might have 3.
Right.
And, trying to tell the sellers that 3 is outstanding. Like on any other day, 3 would be wow.
And I always look at the percentages. So if a home, in these multiple offer situations, maybe it's selling at 100 to 103% of list. That's not crazy. If we look at these markets like Arizona, I think they just put their data out. Some of those homes sold at 150, 160% of list. Yeah, that's a problem. 60% over ask is not an ideal situation for anybody. So I don't think that every market is equal, but I think where we're seeing success here, and it sounds like where you have similar success, is it's aggressive pricing. It's not people who are like trying to break the glass ceiling for pricing in their neighborhood.
Yeah, we're seeing price reductions for things that were priced in 2020, 2021, early 22 pricing. People that are just stuck, like, well, my neighbor got blah, blah, blah. So we are seeing a little bit of a backup on those prices, not only here, but at the Jersey Shore, which is another market we follow here.
This is the time to do it. I dislike that price reductions get such a negative light on them, because in reality, it's an adjustment to try and meet the market. So it's a good thing. You're trying to, get ahead of it. So I think this is a great time where some sellers miss that opportunity. Many people have done step one, which is like cancel during the holidays, take a break, take it off during the cold. Now we come back in the new year. I think a lot of people try to list at the same price, and it's a mistake because people look at it and go, wasn't it priced in that in October, right? And what's changed really since October in
You're exactly
affordability?
Right.
But if you come at it and you've done a reduction and it's significant enough to make a difference, now it feels new. Now you hit the market again, you can remarket. People see it with a different light. You hit a whole new buyer pool if you do enough of a reduction. So there's some pretty strong value, particularly this time of year, if you reduce the right way.
Well, when you hit the nail on the head, because people will sometimes go, all right, I'll do a $7,000 reduction. It's like, no.
On $1 million property, right? Yeah. It's like, people aren't even looking at that.
You need to hit a threshold where it makes a difference, where a new buyer that wouldn't have seen it before will see it now.
There's always rules of thumb, and I don't know how much I believe in them, but I know that generally I try to think about it in terms of showing activity and offer activity. So if you've had great showing activity, no offers, maybe the reduction is 3%.
Right.
If you've had no showings, no offers, it might be a 5% reduction, which sounds painful, but that's enough to reset the buyer pool, to get activity, and to actually make the needle move. Versus, I laughed out loud the other day. I watched, as I was looking through the reduction history of property, someone had done, okay, we'll go down by 2,000. And then they did 1,000. And then they did 1,000 again. I'm like, what are you doing?
New guy.
Yeah. Who advised on that? Yeah.
When I list a property now, I'll sometimes, if my seller wants to be a little more aggressive, depending upon how aggressive they want to be, I might say, okay, I'll give it a week. And after a week, if I'm hearing crickets, then we agree to X. And I already have X laid out. They sign it. And then a week goes by and no more conversation. We go right to X. Because, they're a little nervous about, well, if I don't try, it's like, okay, but we're not trying for long because you're going to miss your market.
Right. Well, and I think we're getting back to, and this is a healthy thing in my opinion, but we're getting back to the list price is a suggested payment that will be negotiated in most situations.
Right.
It is not the number you're going to take home. And if you're listing like that, that's a mistake.
Right.
If you want to make 500 and you're listed at 500, unless it's so miraculously below value that makes sense, chances are good someone's going to offer you 450 or 475, right? And we're working our way down. So if 500 is really the number, you should have priced at 515, right? Or you shouldn't test the market if the numbers don't make sense. But you can't really hit it anymore and just expect to get what you list at.
Yeah, although if your expectation is 500 and that is really the value, I'm not against pricing there to create urgency, to get maybe multiple.
If the urgency's there, right. Yeah. And I think that's the key, is where is the actual value? If you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt it should sell for 500 to 510, and most buyers would run data the same way, should be pretty good activity, right? Or maybe even if you listed 490, you'll get a ton of offers and sell over 500. But I think that if you're pushing it, if it's not worth 490 and you want 500, it's going to sit. You're just going to, the market's not going that way.
And the longer it sits, the less you make.
Right. Well, if you heard this part of the conversation in a bubble, you'd almost think that there's all this inventory and a ton of activity. But the reality is, what we're talking about, like the multiple offer situations and buyers in a frenzy, it's in a very small pool of listings. I don't know what inventory is in Bucks County right now, but here, I think in my neighborhood, it's like 1.5 months. Most of the city's about 2, So
we have next to nothing. No, in our buyer pool, our average buyer price point is where, people are like banging at the doors. And so when you see one of those, we had one I might have shared with you, it was underpriced. The listing agent listed it I think, significantly underpriced. But she had 120 booked showings in like 4 days. And then she did an open house, and they were driving on the neighbors' yards, and it was crazy town. And she ended up with, I think, 29 offers, and it will sell for likely, I think they were asking like 640 or something, and went over 800, I believe.
Wow.
So like, berserk. But we're not usually seeing this, but that's the price point. That's 700 to 800. That's where my buyer pool is.
Right.
So anybody right there right now, my God, you're like printing money.
Well, and I think you're hitting a very important point in the head. I think historically what we've seen is that people don't always push their budgets, but once they find their threshold, they tend to look at that threshold. So
Sure.
The person who's looking for a 750 home isn't really competing with the 500 buyer because they're in different thresholds. There's inventory for both. But now the person who is looking at 750 can't find anything. So they're coming down, and they just have more leverage to throw around, knowing that maybe they'll get a renovation loan, or maybe they'll get it and do the work themselves long term. But they're coming into the 500 buyer pool and making it more competitive.
Absolutely.
Strictly because of lack of inventory.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was talking to a gal who wanted me to talk to her about listing her property. And I said, well, I haven't run any comps yet, but tell me what you think your property's worth. She goes, well, we paid 500 and we put 50 in, so 550. I go, nope. That is not how the math works.
I wish. yeah.
Dollar for dollar. So we're seeing that too. So we have sellers who are like, but I've got X in, or but I need, which is my favorite. But I need. Well, we all need. But it's worth what it's worth. It's worth what somebody will pay.
Yeah, and particularly now we're seeing that people won't pay for something that's aged. So if you haven't stayed up on top of your at least basic updates, appliances should be refreshed, paints, do your little things. Buyers walk in, walk out, or they'll negotiate the hell out of it, but they're definitely not interested in paying for something they have to do work on. I don't know if it's like a complete aversion to DIY, or maybe just fairly so. The contractor labor is very expensive right now. But it's just not happening if you need a lot of work.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of how much it costs to do renovations now.
Right.
People don't have the time, and they're already stretching. They're buying above where they would have 2 years ago.
Right.
So they just don't have the room, and that's cash out of pocket.
Yeah, and it's difficult right now. I mean, with rates where they are, most lenders I know are starting to restrict back on the financing a little bit. I've heard some rumors of jumbo loans getting a little bit harder to get, and construction loans getting a little bit harder to get. Money's tight right now, at least from lending side of things. So it's harder to take on these big projects and do that. It's easier to just live, move in.
I actually got an email from a lender that's now doing no doc loans. I haven't seen a no doc loan. I can't even tell you how many years.
Wow.
And now in the email, it looked fairly interesting. Normally they get you with the rate and they get you with the costs. And so we'd have to dig, but I thought that's an interesting turn of events.
You can always gauge sort of where the buyer market is at by how many creative lending questions you get, right?
Right.
And so now I'm starting to get, this year we're a month in, but I've heard, can we talk about seller financing? I've heard, can we talk about 2-1 buy downs? I've heard people talking about ARMs again. ARMs are back, right? So people are thinking about ways, and a lot of it is based on, particularly if you're getting an ARM, based on an assumption that rates are high and will go down in the future. So you're hoping that you can time the market, you get into a 3 to 5 year ARM, and in 3 to 5 years it's better, you refi out, and you're sitting pretty. So there's risk associated with a lot of these products, but the nature of it is people want to buy. The demand is there. I think the inventory is not. And in many cases, the affordability is not. And that's been the more difficult part. Prices are not, other than some markets, prices are not adjusting rapidly.
Yeah, it's interesting because when everybody found out they could work from home, or when a lot of people found out they could work from home, that's when all this crazy town really went into full gear. I saw a study the other day that said a lot of employers now are backing off from that. I think the number was like 30 or 35% are saying, no, you got to come back to the office, because they're finding they can't really monitor productivity. They're not really getting what they thought from their employees. So I'll be interested to see if some of those people who, all of a sudden picked up and moved to Florida, or they bought the big house that maybe was above their budget. I'll be interested to see what happens with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be a busy tenant year. It's already been a busy tenant beginning of the year, but we've got a lot of people who thought about buying a home, thought maybe prices would come down, thought rates would come down, and honestly, neither has happened really since last fall. So you're kind of in the same boat right now. So I think we're going to see a lot of people renew. We're going to see a lot of people trying to rush for the rentals that are available. It's going to be interesting to see, just because prices, at least here, have jumped so much in that market. But it's good if you're investing in that. I mean, investors right now are sitting pretty.
Yeah, we're actually selling a rental property that we own, and we have been very nice to these tenants because they've lived there for so many years.
Yeah.
But the new owners could rent it for probably $400 or $500 more a month than we were charging now. Just you know, if you want to be really aggressive. So
well, and this is the balance in the landlord world, right? But how much do you keep it low versus now how much could you just charge market rate, knowing it's adjusted so much? And
yeah, I'm a softie. I was trying to be nice.
Yeah, you can try to be.
But at some point, you can't be that nice.
I've been thinking about that. So obviously, you know, you're in the middle of looking for a rental property yourself right now.
Yep.
I just bought a home here, and so I think we talked through some of the buyer challenges that we faced. What do you think has been most successful for you in terms of overcoming those challenges? What have you been focused on to try and find properties that make sense for you?
Well, of course, you need to know what the ROI is for you, your return on investment. You need to understand if it's a property that's been rented before, what they got and when. I'm looking for something that would be a summer rental. So I have to look at seasonality and what could I get in the summer, and does it make sense for me to rent it for X amount of weeks or months to pay for the year. So
and where can Matt sleep when he comes to visit?
Where can Matt sleep? That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's on the investor log.
I have your little plaque. You and your brother each have a room. Don't worry. But, you know, I have to make it make sense, right? So you have to look at that, and finding it's very interesting and looking at when people bought these properties and what they're asking for them now. And a great many of the properties I'm looking at, people bought during 2021, even 22. And they're trying to flip them. And they're not. They're still high.
Tough spot to be in. Actually, that's a lot of the people asking me about seller financing, is people who are in that boat. They bought something thinking they would have a quick flip. That quick flip took longer than they thought. They missed the market. Now the demand's not there. It's a tough boat to be in.
Yep. And, you know, here it's winter, of course, so nobody's looking at the short properties.
Yeah, beach property in winter is a tough sell.
It's a little bit of a chilly thing, but it's interesting to watch them trickle down. Don't get me wrong, the prices are still crazy, but it's interesting to watch them trickle down. And, you know, people have a greed thing going on, and I guess I can't blame them because the numbers were so outrageous. People sold and they moved into hotels. But I think the investment properties, the second homes, the rental properties, those are the first ones you peel off when you start to think you need to tighten up your finances with inflation and anything else. So it'll be interesting to see if this market adjusts accordingly.
Yeah, I've noticed, I think people forget pretty quickly how easy it was for a little bit there to acquire properties. And because of that, people could sell for a pretty good premium. You know, there was a while when the second home vacation loan program, remember they were letting you put 10% down, and they were waiving PMI in some instances. And, you know, it was nuts. Now you have to put 20 to 25% down. The interest rate is triple what it was, you know, and so it's difficult to imagine how different it is if you weren't really active in both markets. But I think people tend to forget, if there's a reason your neighbor sold for $750 and it set a new neighborhood record, it's because rates were sub 3 and someone could afford that, and it cost the same as when they bought it at 600, you know, for rates in the 6s. And that's really what the struggle is right now, particularly with comping things or
what about with you with investments and so forth? How are you overcoming?
Yeah, so on our end, what I've noticed is working here is just being flexible. So what I forever look back on as making a good decision was when I bought my condo in 2020, I bought in a building that was very rental friendly, because now when I went to exit the market, not that the market's unfavorable to one-bed condos, I probably could make a little bit of profit, particularly because I pay myself on the sale. But I think renting it makes a lot more sense. I'm locked in at a great low interest rate. The demand for rent in West Loop is through the roof right now. So for me, I'm very grateful that when I bought, I was thinking ahead to, okay, I might not want to sell when I move out, and what does that look like? So more than ever, I am hearing, not just from me, but from buyers who are active, they're focused on options. Could I Airbnb this out? If I did that, people who wanted to do that, what would that process look like? What licenses do I need? Who's going to tell me I can't do it? Could I do a regular 12-month lease on this property if I move out and the market's unfavorable? So I do think, if nothing else, the correction is teaching people that it is a little bit unfavorable at times to buy, particularly in a market like this with a lot of condos, in a building where you don't have the option to rent, because then you're stuck. You got to sell, or you got to just pay both mortgages, but you really don't have a choice.
Well, and you remember the first rule of real estate, which is location, location, location.
Right.
So no matter what you buy, that's, in my search, the key is I look at a map first thing. If it's not where I want it, I don't look at the pictures. I don't care. So it's got to be the right spot.
I think that's another lesson that I learned, and that others are learning here, is that location, there are a lot of locations that have great value depending on what you're looking for. You just might not be aware of them. Chicago's 77 neighborhoods. We're building the 78th right now. You could take years and not really know neighborhoods all that well. So when you're looking for investments, to come into it with a broad enough mind to think, okay, and maybe I can't find it in Lincoln Park, the neighborhood everybody knows, but it could be in Irving Park, because even people don't know as well. That could be a significant value for you. If you're willing to go the extra 10 minutes, you could save hundreds of thousands. So,
well, and investors need to go into it with a very strong stomach, because as great as it all sounds, I can rent it this many weeks or this many months, and you may have weeks, months that you have nobody in it.
Yeah.
Or you have an issue at the house and you can't rent it, or whatever the thing is. So you better have a budget where you can carry that property without throwing your primary residence into jeopardy.
Absolutely. You might get very lucky and rent it out quickly, and some owners do. But we're seeing many rentals that have 1-2 months vacancy, and all of a sudden you have to be able to account for that. So there's certainly a stomach for that, and you have to have a budget. Yep,
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing that came up that we didn't really go too far into, and I'd love to just talk about, how many homes have you renovated now? All of them, right? Everyone we lived in renovated.
Everyone we've ever, I think I'm on my 7th or 8th house.
Yeah. So, wow. So, we see now, I think, a huge opportunity for people that are willing to get into a project, whether it's a project they're going to do right now or a project they're going to do over the next couple of years.
Yep.
It doesn't really make a difference, but ultimately I think there's probably a strong stomach for, I'll buy a place and redo kitchens, I just bought this place because I was going to redo kitchens, redo baths, and probably some more extensive work. But what, in your experience, has been the most valuable additions you can make, rehabs you can make? And then we'll talk about some other, silent things and things like that.
Sure. Well, so as far as dollar for dollar, kitchens and bathrooms always win, hands down.
The sexy stuff. What looks good in the photos?
Of course. And, if it makes it more livable, as you know, I take out walls as a hobby. So everybody likes to be in one room.
I've learned that any wall is disposable.
I walk through with the contractor, go, that's got to go, that's got to go. He's going, ugh.
It's funny you say that, because I remember touring homes and then coming in after the contractor and we're like, what's there? I don't remember.
Yeah, so that's the sexy stuff. But really what is important is like systems. Are the systems in place? The HVAC, the siding, the roofing, are those all in good quality? And so when you're buying, you need to see if that's a nut you're going to have to take on. That's a big nut. Right.
Well, and it's interesting because you have to frame all this in the right light. If you redo your kitchen and you highly customize it and you add in ultra luxury and you overspend on things, you're not going to get that money back. It is not a one-to-one return. If you do a nice upgrade, nice enough to get it to modern standards, maybe with some bonus additions that make it stand out above your average listing, you might get, like 105% return? We're talking like very minimal on your overall investment. But that's good, right? Maybe. Like that's a great return on investment. People, when they do a roof, have it in their heads, like, I put 10 in the roof, I should get 10 more in the sale price. No, the expectation is at that market value, I don't have to worry about the roof. Right? So that's sort of, it wraps into a difference of like cost of ownership or cost of maintenance versus actual upgrades and rehab.
Yep. And the other thing too, when you rehab, you have to be careful. Like, I can look at some houses and go, I know what year they did that.
Yeah, right.
Because everything, they have navy blue cabinets or they have dove
We have
gray
an entire
cabinets.
era of 2000 built condos in
Great.
Chicago, and you can tell immediately from the photos, like, oh, that was built in '01, '02, '03. You know,
Well, it's not dissimilar from back in the day in the 70s. We had the olive green and the gold and the orange, you know. And
right,
when I walk
right.
into those houses, I go, I know exactly when that was.
I worry about that now. We live in the HGTV era, and how many barn doors do we see, and how many all-white kitchens do we see? Or,
Enough with the barn doors. Let's be
it's
done
crazy. We have a barn door in here, not by choice, but it is. And I'm like, why would you just put a normal one in?
Yeah, and I love the gray and the navy and all those colors. I think they're beautiful. I
Yeah.
would be careful about doing a big, like a whole kitchen. Maybe do it in
Yeah,
the
you see these
afternoon
kitchens,
or-
and yes, they look beautiful in some cases, but you see this dark blue cabinet right in the middle, and you're like, man, as soon as that trends out, it's going to stand like a sore thumb against other listing photos. You know, it's bold,
Yeah.
but bold isn't always the way to go.
Well, I always try to think about when I go to sell because someday that will happen.
Yeah,
And so even though I made choices in my house now that they're really for me, but I try to keep it like as a palette that the average person would appreciate.
right.
If you get too crazy, I always go back to the story. I had a client who had a heart-shaped red bathtub.
Yeah, gotta
And
go.
they loved it and were never moving. 2 years later, when they were moving, I made them take the bathtub out because it was like, this is not a motor lodge. You got to
Right.
get that out of here. It was like the
Well, and you know,
Poconos.
you can do it the other way too. I think people silently kill themselves with the little customizations and don't even realize it. So I had a client recently, it was a $1 million plus listing. The first thing they did when they buy this place is say, we're going to live here forever. I'm going to work here forever. I want it to be suitable for me. So they ripped out all the trim and redid it. They redid the floors. They redid all the electric. The floors was good. That's a value add. The
Yeah.
trim, the electric, they're doing custom outlets that have charging stations. And
Oh,
look,
boy.
it's nice and it worked for them. They ended up moving less than 9 months later, and they don't understand why nobody's going to give them $100,000 more than what they paid after doing the outlets, you know? So it's
Yeah.
difficult. That's not an upgrade that's worth an immediate improvement on investment.
Right. No. You have to be careful with functional obsolescence, right? Doing anything that only you appreciate.
You appreciate, right?
Well, a pad in your yard.
How
that's
about you?
Yeah. But, you know, it's tough, like trim and baseboard heat and window treatments. And that's a lot of money, and it doesn't always convey over. People don't always.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it's tough. What would you, so do you recommend anything DIY? Would you ever DIY anything, or at this point is it all contract based?
I know myself, and I like to call the man, as I say.
Yeah.
You know, I
I got a
know
guy
what
for
I
that.
do.
Yeah.
I got a guy for that. Everybody knows Sue's got a guy. So I'm a big proponent of. I'm having some painting done. I call the man. Could I do
Yeah.
the painting? Probably. I'm terrible at it, and my time is better spent doing what I do for a living or having fun in my life.
Yeah.
So I think that's a luxury that I deserve at this point.
Yeah.
Having said that, in my younger years, I've done plenty of things on my own, plenty of wallpaper, and I never used it, but your dad would have the drill out and be putting stuff up or
Yeah.
fixing broken things. So, you have to start somewhere. And if you have these skills and the time, then it's okay to DIY as long as it's not going to look like Uncle Floyd did it with his one bad eye and,
Well, yeah, we see it, right? You can come to a house, you have an inspection, the inspector goes, I think the owner did a lot of work themselves. And you're like, oh no.
Especially flooring, like they don't make it all neat at the trim.
Right.
And you're going,
You want to install a vanity, you want to do a vanity top, you want to
Right.
repaint your cabinets. There's certainly
Faucet.
things that mount the television. I just mounted my television, right? It takes work, it's fine, don't hit any plumbing, but you can do it. So,
Yeah.
but I think the big keys are plumbing, electric, anything that has to do with your heating and cooling. I mean, it's just, there's certain components that you should not be touching, right? And I think we see too many people we come in and it's like, how long has your HVAC had duct tape over the sensor, the emergency shutoff sensor? And they're like, oh, well, it kept clicking off, so I taped it, What, that reads for CO2. What do so there's just too much of that. I think people are not careful.
You got to call the man. When it comes to those sorts of things, you never mess around with
Right.
anything that could make the home uninhabitable. Your HVAC goes out in the middle of your winter, you have
Yeah.
a problem. You're
Yeah, and oh,
seeing
by the way,
search
you
engine-
can't just get someone out in an hour. You know, there's not
No.
HVAC technicians sitting in the van waiting for your call right now. So,
Nope.
yeah,
Everything costs more too. I bid out a whole house generator recently, and it was more than double than it was
Yeah.
a few years back.
crazy.
Why? Because they don't care if they put it in my house. They'll put it in someone else's house.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always a fan. My thoughts are, A, if it's a centerpiece, pay someone to do it. If everybody's going to stare at it, unless you're perfect at it, don't do it. But if you can try it, and the
Sure.
worst is you mess it up and bring somebody in to fix what you did, it's not going to be worse than when you started. So
Sure.
take it on if you want to do some DIY, but don't do electric. There's no reason to
Unless you're an
install. If you want to
electrician.
install like a light fixture, okay, that's the end of it.
I'm always afraid. Remember in Jurassic Park when the kid touches the fence and they
Yeah,
turn
like,
on?
yeah.
I'm always
yeah.
afraid that's going to be me laying in the middle of my floor.
The power could be off to the entire house, and I'm afraid to touch the electric.
Me
I don't
too.
know. It's like I know somehow it's going to shock me.
I know. You're going to have smoke coming off of you like the kid.
Well, so I guess maybe the best way to end this is, I mean, it's beginning of February. I can't even believe that I was saying Happy New Year.
I know.
It feels like yesterday, and now
I
we're
know.
already in February. But so any recommendations for somebody who's about to get active in your market this year? Is there something that you think they absolutely should or need to do to be successful?
Yep. If you're a seller, I think you need to stage your home properly, touch up the paint, clean things, make things look like we did pre 2020. We're back to that. And if you're a buyer, I think you need to broaden your search zone, your price point, and keep your expectations realistic because, you're really not finding, I won't say deals, you're not finding great deals right now. So just be very, very conscientious of what you're expecting, and then you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for the buyers in particular, know your must-haves, know your must-avoids, but be very flexible from there. You might find a lot of those in a neighborhood you weren't thinking about. So be open to that because it will open your options. And I think the other option is, or the other side of it is, don't get frustrated. It's going to take a bit. Inventory is tough. It is competitive. So you might lose a few. It might not be there tomorrow. But the more prepared you are, the better you know what you're looking for, the more likely you are to succeed. And to your point, expect to get optimistically 7 of 10 things that you want. If you're buying a used house, it's not going to come with 10 of 10. It doesn't work like that. And then for sellers, I think you said it exactly right. This is the time where perfection, or supposed to get it, matters. You need to be presenting the magazine quality version of your house as best you can. So staging needs to look good, photos need to look good, the videos need to be on point. So anything you can do to make sure your house looks great and is trending online, particularly, that's essential right now to get eyeballs, because that's all it's about, getting as many views as possible.
Yep, and those are the people who are getting more than expected for their homes because it looks so much better than the competition.
Right. There is something to be said. If mentally I think it's going to take work versus mentally I think, oh my gosh, this is above expectations,
Correct.
there's a whole different negotiation that comes out of that buyer.
Correct.
Absolutely. Well, this is awesome. I always love talking and catching up. So we'll do more of these this year. I would love it if we could do this at least once a month and just check in. So
me too. And I was so bummed we didn't do it at Christmas when you were sitting in my living room.
I know, when I was sitting right there behind you in the living room. Whatever.
Well, we had too much fun playing.
Yeah.
So stupid. Well, I love you, and I'm glad we can have these chats. I'll do it anytime you want.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone, take care. If you got value from this, follow. We'll do it again, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye, guys.